I want to start this video by apologizing to Madam Web because Borderlands is somehow worse. So let's talk about what went wrong and why this thing is just so bad. Now, as always, if you want to see what I gave this movie out of 10, head over to my shorts, TikTok or Instagram and check out my one-take movie review on this movie. But without further ado, I guess let's talk about the horrible movie and the worst movie of the year, in my opinion, Borderlands. Now, apparently this movie went through tons of behind the scenes issues. It was originally written by Craig Mason, who is known for the Sharon Noble and the Last of Us series on HBO, but then they brought in Eli Roth and he pretty much just rewrote this whole script and put his own flair on it. And allegedly, this script was so bad that Craig Mason himself asked for his name not to be associated with this script and with this film at all. And you know how bad a script has to be for someone to ask not to be associated with it at all. But for me, after watching this movie, I probably would have asked the same thing because in my opinion, this movie was just not good at all. Now, this review may be pretty short because it's super hard for me to talk about movies that I just don't like at all. And I also don't really know anything about Borderlands. I haven't played the games prior to the movie. So if you have played the games and you're watching this, I'm curious to know what you thought of the movie given that you had prior knowledge going into this thing. But anyways, this movie follows Cate Blanchett's character, who is a bounty hunter. And when she returns to her home world to rescue a young girl, she later finds herself with a group of others looking for a lost treasure on her home planet of Pandora. Starting things off with the good, now this movie had a lot of bad, and to be honest, it was mostly all bad. But if I had to find one thing that was good about this movie, I would probably say Ariana Greenblatt was the good in this movie. She was really the only one that seemed like she wanted to be there, and it looked like she was having genuine fun in her role. No hate to the other actors, but I just feel like they didn't really fit their roles all that well, and the script really didn't help them that much at all. And for me, it just felt like one of those things where the actors were there to collect their paycheck and get out. So yeah, Ariana Greenblatt was really the only good in this movie, and she was really the only character that I got a little bit of enjoyment out of. Moving on to the so-so, and the only thing I have here is, I guess, the action. I mean, it was pretty generic, but it did have its moments at times. There were a couple moments in there that were pretty cool, but with how bad this movie was, I was really hoping that the action would redeem everything else in this movie so I could at least say, yeah, this movie sucks, but at least the action was fun. But sadly, even though this action did have its moments, it is the epitome of average and bland. And finally, buckle up because we are getting into the bad, which is just about everything in this movie, if I'm being honest, but I'm gonna try to break it up for you here. So the first thing I have for the bad is the story. Now, I guess this story was a coherent story, but for me, it was just boring all the way through and just had no excitement. Now, I'll be honest, it was tough for me to stay awake during this movie because of how boring it was. And if I didn't do movie reviews on YouTube and TikTok, I probably would have walked out of this movie. And that is a big thing for me to say because no matter how bad a movie is when I'm watching it in theater, I never have ever really considered walking out of a movie. I always stick it out towards the end, but this is the first movie in my 27 years of life where I was like, man, if I wasn't doing this thing on YouTube and TikTok, I would have been out of this theater. I mean, in this, they just plop you into this brand new world and they just don't build it out at all. I mean, I probably couldn't tell you a single thing on how this world works. Plus, the villain in this movie, just completely absent throughout the entire thing. He shows up like for 30 seconds at the beginning and then pops up in the final act and you're like, oh, yeah, that guy exists. And they also don't tell you a single thing on what he's going to do or why he wants this big treasure that they've been searching for this whole movie. And one more thing on this treasure slash vault that they were looking for this entire movie, they build this thing up to be this big source of power. And yes, I guess it is for our main character. But once we get to the end of the movie, we spend all of maybe like 15 seconds in that vault that they were looking for, and I'll just leave that at that. It felt like this thing wanted to be like Guardians of the Galaxy, but it just completely missed the mark on literally everything. You don't really care about what's going on at all in this movie, which makes the emotional moments that they try to have just not work at all because you could care less about what you're watching on screen. And comparing this to Madam Web, yes, I think Madam Web is not a good movie, but at least during that movie, I was entertained at how bad it was, if that makes sense. Where with this movie, I was just not entertained at all. I was just bored through this whole thing, and it was just downright bad. Next up for the bad, I have the characters, and I think this may be one of the most disappointing parts of the movie for me because this thing had an all-star cast and all these characters had potential to be really fun, but they just weren't. We really don't get to learn a single thing about them outside of like one trait. Plus, this cast had no chemistry at all, which is surprising because this is a cast that on paper, if anything is going to be good about them, it's going to be the chemistry, and it just wasn't for some reason. And I guess that's something you can put on the script, but to me, it really just felt like some of these roles were just really miscast. I mean, we had Kevin Hart playing a serious guy in this thing, and Jamie Lee Curtis was just kind of there. I don't really remember what her character was or what she was doing, and I guess that's more of a testament to how bad this movie was. But it just sucked to see how bad this movie was, considering it had people like Kevin Hart, Cate Blanchett, and Jamie Lee Curtis. Again, I haven't played the game, so I don't know if these characters were accurate representations of the game, but for the movie at least, they were just bland, boring, and uninteresting in my opinion. And finally, for the bad, I have the humor. Now, this movie wanted to be funny, but again, like everything else in this movie, they just kind of missed the mark on the humor in my opinion. Really, none of the jokes landed for me, and the humor felt super forced at times in this thing too. And throughout this entire movie, I think it may have gotten one chuckle out of me, and it really wasn't even a chuckle. It was more one of those laughs where I just kind of blew a little bit more air out of my nose than I usually do. Also, I don't know how they did it, but they somehow made Jack Black not funny in this movie. His character Claptrap was supposed to be the comedic relief in this thing, and honestly, the only relief I got in this movie was when those credits finally rolled. I mean, when you have Jack Black in your movie, I feel like all you really have to do is just let Jack Black be Jack Black and everything will turn out fine, but they just didn't do that in this movie. I also think they forgot that they had, you know, Kevin Hart in this movie, who is, in my opinion at least, pretty capable of making people laugh if you let him, but I'll just leave that one alone for now. Anyways, I've never really been annoyed about a movie trying to be funny and it not working. I can usually get over it, but this movie takes the cake, and that's all I'll say on the humor in this film. But overall, if you haven't guessed it already, Borderlands is just not a good movie at all. It's bland, boring, and is one you can definitely skip or just completely run away from. Those are my thoughts on Borderlands. Let me know in the comments if you thought this movie was just as bad as I thought it was. And as always, be sure to like, subscribe, comment, get your Eazy Apparel at shopeasyapparel.com. God bless, and I'll see you guys later. Peace.